Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Susan Moffett, and I am Creative Director of Future Histories Lab here at Berkeley, and also Executive Director of the Global Urban Humanities Initiative. I'd like to welcome both our public audience, our Zoom audience, and of course our students to Humanities 20, Explorations of Art and Design. And this fall, our theme is Landscapes of Migration, Incarceration, and Resistance. And today I am thrilled that we have with us filmmakers Li-Shin Yu and James Q. Chan, and we will be getting to their presentation very soon. But I want to make a few announcements, and I also want to start, as we always do, with an acknowledgement that we are here in Berkeley, also known as Huichin, which is the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, who are still very much active and exerting leadership in the community. So this is where we are. I also want to point out another location, which is Angel Island. This year's activities are centered on the Angel Island Immigration Station, and Angel Island lies in the territory of the Coast Miwok people. And if folks would be interested in learning more about that indigenous history, I encourage you to go to our website, futurehistories.berkeley.edu, and in the Angel Island section, you can hear a wonderful hour-long talk by Greg Saris about the Coast Miwok history of Angel Island. And you can also find videos of the rest of our talks from this semester on our website. So I encourage you to take a look both at our future talks, which are going to continue through the spring, and at videos of our past talks. I want to make sure that our public audience knows that this speaker series is just one part of a whole year of exhibitions and performances, courses, and public speaker series that is called A Year on Angel Island. And we are using the Angel Island Immigration Station as a jumping off point, an observatory from which to think about themes of immigration and othering and belonging. I want to make a few announcements about upcoming events, and I want first to let students know that usually I do course announcements and housekeeping at the beginning of class. Today, so that we have a little bit more time to talk about your final assignment, we're going to do it at the end of class. So I'm going to wrap up with our speakers just a little bit early today, and we will say goodbye to them, but then please stay in your seats and we'll go over the rest of our assignments. If you want to talk to the filmmakers after class, you don't have to run out after them. They will be in the lobby afterwards. So please do stay in your seats after the end of the talks, and then you'll have a chance to talk to the filmmakers in the lobby later. So some upcoming events that will be of interest to the public as well as our students. There is a new play here at Osher Theater in downtown Berkeley called Colonialism is Terrible, but Pho is Delicious. And as you might guess from the title, it's a comedy, and it is looking at questions of food culture and appreciation and appropriation. And it opens November 4th, but November 15th is UC Berkeley night. And so if folks are interested in coming, we have student, faculty, and community discounts on our website if you want to come to the play that night. And we're really excited that Professor Lok Soo, who is in the Ethnic Studies department here, she is working on a book about food trucks, and she will be part of the conversation after the play that evening along with the actors in the play. I also want folks to know about the performance on December 3rd here on the UC Berkeley campus of the Angel Island Oratorio. It's a beautiful new piece of music. It was composed by Huang Ro. It was commissioned by the Del Sol Quartet. It will be performed here at Berkeley by the Del Sol Quartet and the Berkeley Chamber Chorus, directed by Wei Cheng. And that is a really gorgeous piece of music about the history of the Angel Island Immigration Station. Then in February 23rd through 26th, UC Berkeley students will be performing Lenora Lee's really moving dance called Within These Walls. That was a site-specific performance that was created and premiered inside the detention barracks at Angel Island, and it is being restaged here at Zellerbach Playhouse by UC Berkeley students, and that will also really be worth seeing. After today, we only have 3 more talks in our speaker series. I'm really sad that it's coming to an end, but our last talks are fantastic. On November 4th, we have Julio Morales, who curated the exhibition here at BAMFA at the Berkeley Art Museum called Undoing Time, Art and Histories of Incarceration. On November 18th, Elizabeth Fair will be talking about the poetry of Angel Island, and in particular, her study of where it is located in the building. Certain poems were located next to windows. The poem was about looking out to Oakland and longing to be off the island, and you are looking out at Oakland. So she's going to talk about some of those interpretations of poetry and space. Then finally, December 2nd, we have Huang Ro, the composer of Angel Island Oratorio, and Charlton Lee and Catherine Bates from the Del Sol Quartet, who will be talking about the creation and development of that really interesting piece of music. And all of these are open to the public here at the Osher Theater. They will also be live streamed and recorded as well. And if folks want to know about these and other events coming up now and through the spring semester, you can sign up on our website for our newsletter. So now I want to turn to the main event of today, which is this very interesting film called Plague at the Golden Gate. And I'm really excited to have the director of the film, Li-Shin Yu, and the producer, James Q. Chan, to talk about this film, which is so timely. It's talking about the outbreak of the bubonic plague in San Francisco at the turn of the century, and then as now the disease and the public health threat was blamed on Asians, and they will be talking about both the history and how that relates to what's been going on today during the COVID pandemic. We're going to be talking both about the public health themes of the film, but also about the genre, the medium of film itself, because this course is called Explorations in Art and Design, and we've been thinking this semester about the ways that different forms of art help us think about immigration, othering, and belonging. And we've looked at painting and theater and dance. We'll be looking at music. And today, in looking at film, we'll have a chance to look at the way that film in particular combines the two-dimensional visual image and music and the human body and the human voice. And us as viewers, whether we are alone or in a group watching, we are helping create that experience. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing about the art and craft of filmmaking with our guests today. And in particular, this film makes really masterful use of archival documents, both as source material, as sources of information, but also as objects, as storytelling objects and as bearers of emotion as well as of information. And you know, this semester we've been talking a lot about how artists use archives. Lenora Lee talked about the way she used not only oral histories, but also archives to inform the dances that she created. Of course, the archives were essential to the creation of the plays Illegal that we heard about last week, and the other play, The Paper Dreams of Harry Chin. And so we'll be hearing more about the use of archival materials today. And I want to direct both our public audience and students to our Future Histories Lab website, where we have links to archival resources, including digital resources, and links to, you know, in-person archives that you can visit. We also have links where you can see a number of the films that I'm going to be mentioning today. So if you want to see the full films that we're talking about, go to futurehistories.berkeley.edu, Angel Island section, go to the resource section, and we list not only films, but also books and other resources, but that's the easy way to find the films that we're going to be talking about. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Li-Shin Yu is a New York-based filmmaker and director of Plague at the Golden Gate for the PBS series American Experience. Li-Shin also co-directed the Chinese Exclusion Act for PBS with Rick Burns. And I highly encourage you students to watch the Chinese Exclusion Act film as well as Plague at the Golden Gate. Today we're focusing on the Plague film because it's quite new. It just came out in May, and it's so relevant because of the pandemic that we are still in. But please also, when you have a chance, take a look at the Chinese Exclusion Act film, because I think it will really dovetail well with everything we've been talking about this semester. Li-Shin is a longtime collaborator of documentary filmmaker Rick Burns, and their recent film about Oliver Sacks, his own life, about the neurologist's life and writing, has won rave reviews. And another collaboration with Burns was New York, a documentary film, and Li-Shin won an Emmy for Outstanding Achievement in Editing for that film. And that was an epic series, an 8-part production chronicling New York's rise from a remote Dutch outpost to the great city that it is today. And other films that Li-Shin has created have garnered multiple awards, including numerous Emmys, Peabody's Writers Guild of America, and the DuPont Columbia Awards, among others. So she's had a really diverse and interesting career. She began her career collaborating with New York independent filmmakers, including Jim Jarmusch, Spike Lee, Sarah Driver, and Peter Wong, and more recently with documentarians Christine Choi, Bill Moyers, Thomas Lennon, and Stanley Nelson. James Q. Chan is an Emmy-nominated producer and director based in San Francisco. His recent credits include Plague at the Golden Gate, which he produced, and Chinatown Rising. And Chinatown Rising won multiple, I think it's, is it Chinatown Rising or Chinatown Forever?
Forever Chinatown.
Forever Chinatown.
But there's a Chinatown Rising film too.
There's a lot of films. Anyway, when I was editing, I got this wrong, and all of a sudden I realized that it is the Chinatown, Forever Chinatown, that is the story of the 81-year-old artist who builds these wonderful miniature models of the San Francisco Chinatown rooms of his youth. It's very charming, very touching. And James also directed Bloodline, which is the story of the Oakland chef, Tu David Fu, whose childhood in West Oakland was shaped by his parents' experiences in the Vietnam War and a Thai refugee camp, as well as their relationship to food and the ocean. And it was nominated for an Emmy this year. James has also created large format 360-degree circle vision films for Disney and launched the documentary series Chinatown Shorts. James received a Certificate of Honor from the San Francisco Board of Supervisors for his work highlighting stories from the AAPI community, and his sensibilities throughout his projects are shaped by his refugee and working class background, love for nature shows, and memories of his mother's cooking. He is currently adapting Lawrence Yep's acclaimed Child of the Owl book into a narrative series set in San Francisco's Chinatown. James is a 2021 YBCA 100 honoree and a member of the Directors Guild of America. So please join me in welcoming Li-Shin and James.
Thank you, Susan, for that introduction, and thank you for having us to be part of this amazing, thought-provoking series. You know, I'm suddenly looking at your course, and I'm like, I want to come back to school so I can attend these classes. So it's really a great honor to be here with you and talk about our film, Plague at the Golden Gate.
Thank you, Susan. We were talking earlier today and throughout the weeks of preparing for this, how terrific this series is, because for us as filmmakers and as citizens and community members, there's multiple entry points into a community, like Chinatown. And so there are multiple entry points in our collective history, through food, through music, through books. And today we are excited to share that we are blessed in this medium of filmmaking. And so it's fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Yeah.
I wanted to pose a question to the audience first. How many people have seen the film Plague at the Golden Gate? Not one, two? Okay. Well, it's online, and we're not going to test you now, but we're going to walk you through. And why don't we just begin in terms of like conversation of how this film came about, the genesis of it. So we'll start with Li-Shin.
Sure, yeah. You know, the story, in fact, found me. You know, when I started to research and learn about it, I was just shocked that it was yet another story in history that I wasn't aware of. I mean, who knew? I wager most Americans would not know the most feared disease in human history, the Black Plague, bubonic plague, had come to our American shores. And so Plague at the Golden Gate explores what happens, how San Francisco reacted when a case was found in San Francisco Chinatown, how racist, in fact, the response was harsh and finger pointing. City and state officials denied even the fact that this community is at risk, and state and federal authorities were vying over control. You know, that's another issue that we are facing today. So all of these issues just seem like so resonant to our experience today, especially with COVID and the racist response, the denials, and the political gamemanship, all of that. So it just seemed like it was yet another story we needed to tell. And we're grateful that American Experience first BIPOC executive producer, Camille George, understood that, you know, we should tell this story from not your traditional white male perspective. So she reached out to Center for Asian American Media's Stephen Gong and Dong Young to help her put together an Asian American team. And so that's how I got on board and was thrilled to be able to, with Cam's help, put together a predominantly female and mostly Asian American team to do this film. And above all, James was the wisest decision I made. You know, as you heard, he has deep roots in the community, and he's local. I'm from New York, so it's just like perfect kismet. You know, we had one conversation at the end of December 2020, just weeks after I had a conversation with American Experience, and you know, maybe you want to take it from there. Like, why did you jump on?
Yeah, the one conversation, well, the world, we were forced into shelter in place. It was 6 months into sheltering in place, and this unknown disease was coming in COVID, and the story came through. Center for Asian American Media introduced us, and immediately it felt like a great match. One of the things that, as a producer and as a filmmaker, is that we share the same philosophy in terms of serving the film first and foremost, making decisions based on the film. And so one of the decisions was, well, how are we going to tell this? Who is the audience? And Li-Shin wasn't interested in doing just a dry educational film. We found that this deserves a medical mystery. It really played out like a detective novel. And so for us, it was more of like, okay, well, there's a lot of unknown with COVID and certainly with 1900 bubonic plague, and then the challenges that came from that, from filming.
Right. Yeah, it was really sort of the bacteria, you know, germ theory was in place already in 1900, but bacteriology was still at its infancy. So although the bacteria for the bubonic plague was discovered and identified, there was still a lot of unknowns. You know, what is the transmission vector? And could it be contained? And what is the containment methods? These were all unknown at the time. And so there was still a lot of mystery. And, you know, what we found was in that vacuum of knowledge, there are these knee-jerk responses. And so we wanted to explore that and explore how the community subjected to that harsh response then reacted.
What we did find in the research was that I didn't know much about the bubonic plague of 1900. I got to get confused with the influenza outbreak of the mid 1900s, 1918. And so there was a lot of unknown. And then slowly, as we did this research, we realized, wow, history does repeat itself, because whenever there's an unknown disease that comes, there's a knee-jerk response that Li-Shin mentioned, that we find a community to blame.
Right.
From smallpox in Chinatown, bubonic plague in Chinatown, all the way through the AIDS epidemic, the LGBT community, SARS, and so on and so forth, and COVID. So history does come full circle.
Yeah, and it's the story, in fact, is grounded on Angel Island. This was before the immigration had been established in 1910. The Marine Hospital Service is the precursor of our U.S. Public Health Service of today. And it was founded in 1891 to protect the nation from epidemic diseases coming from on board ships. So ships were quarantined, inspected, passengers were inspected, cargoes were inspected. And the station was on Angel Island at Ayala Cove, which is at the time called Hospital Cove. And the story revolves mainly on two federal doctors sent from the East Coast to try to contain the spread of the disease. And so Marine Hospital Service, the first doctor, Joseph Kenyon, had his laboratory there, diagnosing cases and writing reports, so Angel Island is like a key location character for us. And one of our first conversation was, well, where do we film? So obviously Angel Island was a location, San Francisco is a location, and of course Chinatown is a location. And we can talk about how we got to Chinatown more, but
one of the challenges, I feel like, at the very beginning was finding out who the characters were and creating very much like the Greek chorus. And so we were lucky to be able to base this film off on a blueprint. And there were 3 blueprints. There were 3 books written about this time. American Experience optioned one of them. And so David Randall's Black Death at the Golden Gate. The first book was Marilyn Chase's the Barbary Plague, and the third was Plague, Fear, and Politics in San Francisco's Chinatown by Gunter Rees. And then the film itself is a standalone with an amalgamation of all those 3 books, because the film itself relied on these archival images, relied on all the deep resources that these books pulled from. And so we pulled in authors that they used as well. Professor Charles McLean, Berkeley, Nyan Shah, his book, who's coming to see you next spring. But also it was community members in San Francisco Chinatown, that the trust that is built in the community, being able to go to David Lay, who is a phenomenal human being and just a walking encyclopedia of Chinatown knowledge. And he connected us to Bruce Kwan. And Bruce Kwan's great-grandfather, and Bruce Kwan is in the film, and Bruce Kwan's great-grandfather was a merchant in San Francisco Chinatown, and his story connected us to another character, Ing Poon Chu, in the story. So it literally became one person connected us to another person connected to another person, and as Li-Shin mentioned, people shape places and places shape people. So Chinatown was a necessary character in the film, and similar to Angel Island, becoming a necessary character. So through Angel Island was Joseph Kenyon, one of our main character, and he was like the mad scientist that was just like in the middle of the ocean just doing his work. He was a brilliant scientist, but
So how does storytelling happen? How do you transform history into a compelling story. So, as James was saying, we had this narrative form guided by the works of these writers, but then it's also upon us to visualize how to, as you were saying earlier, film is an emotional experience. So how do you create scenes and moments where you can respond in a compelling and connecting to the story on an emotional level. So the visual vocabulary really, for us, of course, the story is the clue. It is, after all, a medical mystery because so much was unknown. The idea, the term of contact tracing isn't even invented, but there were efforts of trying to do that. So we film sort of live footage. There's our live location filming. There is what we created little tableaus, as you were mentioning earlier, and just kind of imagining what it was like back then, what it felt like, what it smelled like or sound like, all of those things to create the visual vocabulary. And of course, images from the archives were key, so key. Perhaps we should watch the first clip. This clip will sort of describe the science mystery.
And for those of you who did go on the field trip to Angel Island, the quarantine station that was there before the immigration station was established in 1910, it was at Ayala Cove, which is where the ferry lands today. So, here we go.
As the media storm swirled around him, a frantic Kenyan tried to retrace the last days of each victim's life in a desperate attempt to determine who or where the next might be.
What made Kenyon so terrified when he started identifying the disease was he found one victim and he could not find any connections to the next victim. It's almost like you're looking at the ocean and you can't see it, but you know something is down there, and he had no idea what it was.
It was a mystery. There was a kind of creeping pace. There would be a case or two, and then it would pause. Kenyon tried to puzzle it out.
He was looking for other cases of plague. He also knew that because of the way Chinatown was being treated by local officials, they might hide cases.
Suspicions everywhere, and every shadow becomes an enemy. 終死一步 daily.
A plague death would require autopsy to confirm the case. It was an offense in the culture, so no one was eager to call in the scientists.
And it becomes a cat and mouse game. And people keep on questioning him. If the plague is as scary as you're saying it is, there should be bodies everywhere. We should also see living victims who are struggling with this.
People thought, well, if the plague exists, it should be spreading like wildfire. Why aren't hundreds of people infected with it? And it obviously made things difficult for Kenyon because in the face of pretty clear evidence, people denied that the plague existed at all.
So as you see, the mystery was baffling the scientists back then. And so the whole idea of mystery and the tension of will they figure it out, will they not figure it out, we use fog as a metaphor, and also using quite often the amoeba-like water sparkle throughout the film to sort of indicate the elusiveness, fluidity of the disease, and how the bacteria might look through a microscope of the time. And so, fog enshrouded Angel Island was very much a factor. And, there's Joseph Kenyon mentioned here, and his successor is Rupert Blue. And they both have very different skill sets. Joseph Kenyon's one of our leading brilliant scientists at the time. And he was, saying, here, look at my scientific results. This disease is here, but the authorities did not want to have anything to do with it because, God forbid, we announced to the world that plague is in San Francisco. What will that do to our economy, and so on and so forth. So that was priority rather than the health issues for the citizenry. And he was in Angel Island in his lab, so we, sort of isolated from the community that was affected. So we filmed all of his scenes sort of in a cold blue light to, emphasize that isolation and that cold science approach that he took. His successor was, someone who actually almost didn't get through medical school, but he had the sort of personal skill set. And he said, when he was assigned here, he said, I'm not going to Angel Island. I'm going to base my lab in Chinatown so I can be in the community that's being affected. So we filmed his tableau and his setup in a warmer, urban, kind of amber glow. So just to kind of juxtapose and bring out the different characters of them. And but I think, as you were mentioning earlier, filming Angel Island, I just said, James, go out and do it, and did a remarkable job. If you want to talk about.
Yeah, the Angel Island. Well, we're blessed with the fog. We filmed in Fogust, so we knew that we needed that moodiness. We lucked out. We, as in myself and our brilliant additional camera person, Jeff Denbroder, who is a local Bay Area, who knows the ocean and knows the climate. And so we got on a ferry, got to the island, and luckily it was misting and it was moody, and so there weren't a lot of tourists there. And so we pretty much had the island to ourselves. And what was really amazing is that when we got there, there's a plaque there on Ayala Cove that depicted and showed where these Marine Hospital Service were living. And so we identified a possible location that Joseph Kenyon would have lived. And so we kind of scouted the area and just filmed the textures that you saw there with the buildings, and it pops up throughout the film. But we wanted to give it that mystery of, 1900, San Francisco was like a vast wilderness. There's also what was a big city, a metropolis in the center, and then wide open ocean. And so if an unknown disease came, it was really hard to kind of pinpoint. And so that became our aha moment of like, yeah, let's seep this in a very mysterious kind of like unknown. And the island itself, like again, showed that it was this isolated, and it was a perfect character for the film.
And kudos to James. He saw a water fountain with a cobweb, and he was like, Jeff, film that. And the sort of raindrop in the puddles, the chip paint window, with the raindrops in front. So that all created this mood of mystery and also tension of like, well, he's behind that window. Is he going to figure it out? Is he going to be able to contain and convince the official to like really take action?
And that is the film vocabulary, where you can rely on archival photographs as we do, but it only goes so far because there's only so many headlines that you can punch in on, so many photos that you can zoom out of. And so it really, like, you know, when you're looking at character building in your stories, look at what visually that you could convey so that it becomes a visceral portal.
Right. Yeah, but you know, archives and archival photos are key. You know, for example, we opened our film in Honolulu, and I knew of these amazingly, devastatingly beautiful photographs of Honolulu Chinatown being burnt down in January of 1900. And it was burnt down because they discovered a number of cases of bubonic plague. And so and they didn't know what to do. And so control burn and ended up burning up down the entire district. 4,500 people were homeless. And initially, as the district was burning, they didn't want the Asian population to disperse, because the idea then was that Asians were disease carriers. So, you know, the concept of you control the people, you control the disease, which is, you know, and when they finally figured, well, we can't let these people burn, they corral them out, you know, like cattle, just with people with shotguns, you know, standing by, just like do not. So from the very beginning, I think, you know, we were able to set up the fear and distrust and all the unknown elements of the story, so that less than a month later, when the same thing happened in San Francisco's Chinatown, you already understood the issue. You already understood like what the community is up against. So, you know, what archives make available for you is also something you can absolutely take advantage of. Maybe show the second clip?
Yeah, let's show the second clip, because we're talking about archival usage in films.
Most San Franciscans didn't care. They couldn't be bothered with the death of a faceless stranger in Chinatown, especially given widespread beliefs that whites were immune. As for city leaders, while they refused to accept Kinyon's diagnosis, they did agree that what they called the Chinese problem needed to be contained.
They didn't really understand how the bubonic plague was transmitted to people, but they knew if it occurred in a city, it would be in one area. And so the public health approach was to find the focus and go in there and do whatever you could to get rid of the disease.
The moment Mayor Phelan declared, Asiatic infections are a constant menace to San Francisco's public health. 75 health inspectors and dozens of policemen, armed with sledgehammers and axes, descended on an unsuspecting Chinatown. They smashed down doors, ransacked homes, stole brazenly, and beat anyone who stood up to them.
They were subjected to plague measures, which included torching of belongings. They would bring in smudge pots of sulfur and fumigate a building. If you were a merchant selling fine silks or ceramics, it would spoil your goods. So these measures, which were crude and discriminatory and not very effective, frightened the populace. People were not eager to report a case of sickness in their home.
In 1900, at the time of the bubonic plague, my great-grandfather had a business called the Pacific Fruit Packing Company, and my family lived above the cannery on Stockton Street in Chinatown. They went to church where Ng Poon Chu was the assistant pastor, and that's how, when he started a newspaper, my great-grandfather helped him fund the Zhongsai Yat Po. And in Chinatown, they would post some of the newspapers on the walls, so the Chinese knew exactly what was going on.
Ng Poon Chu and his newspaper documented what the deeply felt fears and concerns were of Chinese laborers, how they distrusted Western medical authority, how they feared what was going to happen to them from a Chinese perspective.
Alas, why should Chinatown's good name depend on the life and death of a monkey? We don't know whether they are rooting for Chinatown or the monkey. Zhongsai Yat Po Daily.
Nine days after Wong Chuk King's death, Kinyon confirmed 3 more cases, all within Chinatown. Kinyon had feared such an outbreak all along, knowing that even a handful of cases could explode exponentially into a national epidemic within weeks.
So, talking about, filmmaking, it's about hard work, but it's also about chance and discovery. So that opening footage of Chinatown was something I've known and used in the Chinese Exclusion Act film. And it was one of the earliest footage of San Francisco Chinatown from 1900. What we didn't know and discover through Dr. Morans, who you saw in the clip, he let us know that that was actually filmed footage made by the Marine Hospital Service when they were inspecting Chinatown. It was, I think, shot on September 15, 1900. And in a different section of that clip, in another part of the film, you actually see a uniformed Marine Hospital Service man just kind of walking up and down the street. But, James, knowing Chinatown, was immediately able to say, wow, that is
Waverly Place.
Waverly Place. So we were able to get a photograph of Waverly Place and be able to dissolve from one to the other. So there things like that that you do discover from archives, and you scrutinize it, you study it, and you're able to find those connections. And having found Bruce Krong, who's in the audience there with us today, and he so lovingly preserved his great-grandfather's documents, all those Chinese documents and photographs, artifacts. When we were filming and he let us film in his studio, we were going, it'd be nice, because we want to show the fumigation, to have something like really precious. So he goes, how about my great-grandmother's wedding dress in silk? How about some jade? It was just like these incredible items that we were able to create a space that could be period accurate, could be what one might see and feel of the time, and to tell a story that way.
Yeah, and archival photographs and archival materials is so important to historical documentaries, and we have to give a special shout out, because it was everything was locked down. Making a film about a pandemic in the middle of a pandemic had its challenges, but we couldn't get into these archival houses, right? So thankfully, the job of the professional preservationists, their role as curators, they protect and preserve these materials, like Sina from the Ethnic Studies Library here, and the San Francisco Public Library History Center, Susan Goldstein and Christina Moretta, but also like Bruce and who are, you know, personal preservationists for their family. We lucked out with one of the descendants' family scientists, the main scientist that we were following. His great-grandchildren preserved all of his scientific materials, including personal photographs that he took on Angel Island. And so we went to Kansas City to film their material. So if you are working on your projects, reach out to these preservationists, reach out to these libraries and institutions, but also your family members. And because that is really important to be able to convey that message.
But to pick up on what you were saying earlier, you know, we created this tableau, and I started doing that around the Chinese Exclusion Act film because, you know, as an editor prior to that, I always noticed anytime the team filmed anything in an archive, it's just so much more powerful, the imagery. And so for the Chinese Exclusion Act, we filmed at the Chinese Historical Society here and also at the Huntington Library. And when I saw these documents in real life, it was so moving because it really brings home to the veracity of the history that's forgotten, you know, these documents and you know, worn, sometimes torn, smudged, you know, prints coming through the page. All of this, you know, just for me, they became, they lived through the experience, the history, and they are the keepers of that memory for us generations later. So it was really trying to, okay, they're not two-dimensional, they're three-dimensional objects. So we will place them within a situation where they might have lived back in the day and tell the story that way. I think, you know, evoke the power of it more strongly.
Li-Shin does this beautiful job with the tableaus, and they are, she builds these altars and lights them and treats them with respect, and they come alive in a different way because of these altar buildings. I haven't seen any other filmmaker do that before, so I'm not sure if it's in the other clips as well, but you'll see it in the full film. You'll see the treatment of archival materials that is done respectfully and spiritually.
Yeah, and you know, the clip also shows Chinatown location that we were able to access for the first time because of David Lay's connection. But it points to the indiscriminate racist response and the language use, you know. And language is the beginning of violence, really, right? We experience that today with, you know, when our highest official would say Kung Flu, then, you know, people are able to latch onto that and act out. But at the time, also, the health inequity was pretty entrenched. You know, Chinatown, Chinese immigrants pay a hospital tax, but they were denied access to public health service. So it was, and over time, they were trying to create their own hospital or own healthcare service, was denied permission by the city. It was only in the February of 1900 that the Tonghua dispensary was able to open, but it was too late for our first victim to the bubonic plague. So, you know, the racialization, politicization of the disease is because of othering that has happened over decades now by 1900. And I don't think he's in any of the clip we're showing today, but John A. Powell of the Othering and Belonging Institute here at Berkeley. I highly recommend everyone to read his work and his thinking. He illuminates, he in fact is the one in our film who says, if you control the Chinese, you control the disease. And that was very much the thinking then. So, from this film, you can see that racism is built over time. It's structurally built over time. And so breaking it down will also take time. But, even though racism is historical, resistance is also historical. And very much so, that is something we really wanted to highlight, given the anti-Asian, sentiment now as then, wanted to show Chinese and Asian from day one fought back. It's like we knew we didn't have to vote because we could not become citizens, but we knew the power of the law. And so Chinese always fought back in the court.
So we should show the third and final clip, and this is on resistance.
Resistance, yes.
The doctors are about to compel our Chinese people to be inoculated. Tomorrow, all business houses, large or small, must be closed and wait until this unjust action is settled. 中社一報 Daily.
It's back to the wall. A defiant Chinatown turned to its own leaders. A consortium of district associations called the Chinese Six Companies.
The leaders of the six companies were the biggest merchants in Chinatown, the most influential members of their associations. Any dispute with the city government or the state government, Chinese would send their representatives to negotiate or to protest.
The Chinese leaders met with Kenyon at the consulate and implored him to call off his plans. When he refused, the Chinese felt they had no option left but to take to the streets. From the most powerful merchant to the lowliest worker, all of Chinatown took immediate action to protest Kenyon's orders.
There were riots. 1,000 Chinese protesters descended on Portsmouth Square in Chinatown, where federal doctors had set up tents to vaccinate people. And they pulled cobblestones out of the streets and threw them in shop windows, pitching furniture into the street. They stood up to him and they said, "We're not standing for these measures."
It was so terrible that 100 police had to protect Kenyon because the San Francisco mobs would have killed him.
The Chinese in San Francisco are beleaguered, but they also have fought every inch of the way with legal cases that are brought by the leadership of the community, the merchant leaders, sometimes together with the Chinese consul. They sued the government over everything.
Chinatown rose up as one to fight the travel ban. Within days of the mandate, a class action suit was filed, naming Kenyon and the San Francisco Board of Health.
A businessman named Wang Wai sued. He went to court, and he charged that Dr. Kenyon and everyone involved had violated the rights of the Chinese.
It was a petition for an injunction to stop the health authorities from preventing people from leaving the city. It was racially discriminatory, and that was forbidden by the 14th Amendment. which says no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. The Chinese were not eligible to become citizens, but they had secured for themselves recognition as constitutional persons. And as such, they came under the protection of the 14th Amendment.
What you end up having for the court case is a question. Is this a kind of unfair use of the law that targets one group racially unfairly?
The judge agreed with the Chinese. And he said, I see no proof that you've offered that this is a disease more likely to be contracted by or transmitted by Chinese people. He said this travel ban had been illegally applied with an evil eye and an uneven hand, focused on racial theories of disease transmission, completely unscientific.
As you see, sometimes history can be baffling and confounding, but there are these moments of inspiration, of empowerment. So very much the story, we wanted the community's voice to be heard. And just an aside, I wanted to shout out to our amazing narrator, Leah Salonga. And the voice of Chung Yabao, you've heard a couple times now, is Perry Young, who is known as the actor who plays Father Jung in the HBO Max series Warriors, and any of you know that, but we were so fortunate to have gotten them.
One of the special things about being able to tell our stories and being brought onto this project is that we knew that the main characters were two white scientists who were tasked to eradicate plague. And at that time, they were brilliant minds. At the same time, we also didn't want to make a film about white savior. And so through the lens of the Chinatown community fighting back, it added so much more layered material to it, because resistance is part of the foundation of who we are as a nation, right? And so for us, when institutions that are set up to protect the people fail us, it is the community coming together. And so through this film, we had an opportunity to highlight that resistance, because in the end, it required all of San Franciscans to come together to be able to eliminate the plague, not just the two doctors.
So, it is kind of, having worked in historical documentary, I really believe history matters. History is cyclical. Where the past ends, today begins is not always definable, especially when you think about the impact, the legacy of it on us today. So, I really sort of feel blessed actually to be in historical documentary filmmaking, because I think and I hope this film will inspire conversations and open people's minds up, and hope you watch the whole thing on PBS.
Yeah, and I want to invite students to pass your questions on your index cards to the ends, where they'll be picked up by the ushers, and we'll also have an opportunity for anybody, students or others, to raise your hand and ask a question live with the mic, or if you prefer, you can just pass your question to the end. But I just want to thank you just for sharing the craft and the art of putting together this story that makes it so powerful. And in particular, I was really intrigued by, the emphasis on resistance. And it was a wonderful quote that, that they had established themselves as constitutional persons. So although they were considered less than human in the media and in politics, Chinese couldn't have the vote because they couldn't become citizens. Still, within the structure of these racist laws, there were still roots of appeal. There were still judges who cared about the 14th Amendment. So that tension is really fascinating. I want to ask one thing about the maps that you used before we open it up to questions for everyone. Those were some fascinating documents, both as means of tracing the epidemic, but also just as storytelling devices. Can you tell a little bit about how you found and used those maps?
So, documentation, there's in fact, the doctors documented each diagnosed cases, the names, age, profession, and where they were found deceased. And so we were able to get this beautiful map from the 1880s created by the city in a way to control Chinatown, because they wanted to know where each building, where each business was located so that they could control it. But, in retrospect, it gave us a wonderful blueprint of what Chinatown was like then, and for us to be able to locate each of these persons. Initially I thought, okay, come hell, high water, I'm going to name each of these victims. But, it's hard to do 100-some victims, in a 2-hour film. So we used the map as a means of tension creating, of here are these deaths occurring, yet the authorities are denying it, or, just pushing it aside because their concern was somewhere else and not for the community at risk.
And it was a tool for us to locate where Chinatown was in San Francisco. So in the film, you'll see 3 different maps being used. One macro lens perspective of San Francisco, where all the hospitals were, because as the cases left Chinatown, they dispersed into San Francisco, so we mapped out the rest. There's one particular map that was really, I love these maps. They're made by the, they're insurance maps.
Sanborn.
Thank you
very much. The Sanborn maps. And so one of the Sanborn maps that we used detailed all the fire escapes, and these were all insurance maps, but they're beautiful, they're exquisite. So, and these maps are all available at the Library of Congress and high resolution as well, so you can use those for your
And at the
purposes.
map room at the UC Berkeley Geography Department, and also online. Yeah, there are many of us who are great fans of Sanborn maps.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we have some questions. Adiole, would you like to read a question?
Yes, we have a couple of questions from some students. The first question is, there was an idea of control, the people control the disease. So the terror that came with the reports would discourage keeping track of the disease, right?
So the fear would made people not want to report, right? Yeah.
Right. So, it's culturally the way the Western doctor would, if they find someone deceased, right away they would do autopsy, cut you up. But culturally, for the Chinese, that's anathema, because you need to preserve. The idea is that the body needs to be preserved, for the afterlife, and so there was this not understanding until much later, when Rupert Blue was working with a community member, understanding, so that they would be like, no, we're not going to just take the body and cut it up. We will do kind of localized, incisions to just extract what we need to diagnose cases. So it's a lot of these misunderstanding, cultural misunderstandings that cause even greater fears in the community.
Yeah, and there's fear around reporting them, mainly because the Chinese community has been scapegoated being blamed for every single disease possible. So if you report it, or it's a flag for them and your family, who knows what happens, right? So there's fear around that.
Right. I think we have another question.
Yes. Do they film the montage clips before or after they film the interviews?
Great question.
We film interviews first, and then, however, as we were interviewing, for example, the descendants of Joseph Kenyon in Kansas City, we couldn't make a second trip, so we did the interview, and then right then and there saw the amazing collection, photographs, documents, little beakers and from
wedding invitations.
Yeah, wedding invitation, all of that. So we just kind of build his story with their artifacts and filmed it then. So it's
Yep.
kind of a mishmash of
Right, and then when you go out and you're interviewing your subjects and your characters, and we used a preliminary interviews by Zoom to ask them questions, and then that helped shape the script, and then we kind of had an idea of what we wanted.
Yeah, I mean, we went out obviously knowing what our story arcs are, so that whenever we see something, that's pertinent, we just we grabbed it. It's like at Gunter Rees. I was outside.
Professor Gunter Rees wrote the the second book.
Right. And I was setting up the camera for his interview, and James went into the study with Professor Rees, and he came back and said, "Li-Shin, look what's on his bookshelf." It was like this 1900, vials of medicine and a little bottle that is anti-pest medicine that he had kept. So I was like, okay, we have to film that. So at the end of the interview, I just set up this little tableau and grabbed it. So there are kismet moments like that, if you know your story, you know to grab. And that's comes with the research and understand what your story arcs are.
I think we have time for one more question.
Ooh, there's a lot of questions. Okay.
You can ask us outside too. We'll be outside if your question didn't get answered.
Okay. How did you decide what level of editing to use in historical records, pictures, maps, etc. to convey your message across?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is a process. It's oftentimes, we gather way more material than ends up in the film, because as the story evolves and you tighten it and you begin to understand where the peaks and valleys are, then those are images that you begin to, for example, I don't think it's in this clip, but there is, when we were talking about the racialization and demonizing the Chinese, there is an imagery, which is a print of these ghostly skeleton image floating up from Chinatown, with names of leprosy and diseases. And Chinese were seen as that, Asians were seen as that. And so we were able to do that and dissolve it onto a face of a woman walking down the street. So it really kind of hits home the idea that this is how the community was viewed. So it's a lot of ways to.
And lots of editing.
Yeah.
The whole process took 13 months, from research, script writing, production, to post-production. I've never worked on a film that fast before.
So fast. It's incredible that you pulled it together that quickly.
Yeah. I was shocked. I've never worked that hard in my life. But, great team that backs you up all along the way.
Great leadership.
Collaboration is key in filmmaking. And I just want to say, anyone who's interested in history, pursue it. It is so important. And, history and film, there is a place for that. And I encourage anyone with that interest to go for it.
Yeah, so if anybody ever asks you, why are you majoring in the humanities or in history or English? It's because those skills are really essential. Those worldviews are important to telling stories like these.
Absolutely, because they validate each other's stories, and the power of validation is it's healing, and it's where history repeats itself, but then you get to go and say, actually, we get to control and we get to speak about it. So thank you so much for inviting us here.
Yeah, and I have so many questions, and I know other folks have more questions too. So after we have a little talk about our assignments and our housekeeping for the course, you can go out to the lobby and chat some more with Li-Shin Yu and James Q. Chen, and please join me in giving them warmest thanks for this wonderful talk. Thanks so much. So students, I just wanted to talk a little bit about your final assignment, and I just posted the details of that assignment on B courses. And, this talk is a great kind of jumping off point to talk about your final reflection, because that assignment is meant to be a way for you to kind of digest and tie together the many different speakers, the many different themes, the field trips, the exhibitions that we've been talking about this semester. And you have four choices for completing this final assignment. One is to do an essay of about 1,000 words, tying together or finding threads among three or more of the speakers. And I think if you've been doing your weekly reflections, which are fantastic, I have to say I really have been inspired and appreciative of how thoughtful your weekly reflections have been. Going back to some of those weekly reflections and then turning them into an essay, that is one way of completing the assignment. The second way, if you're interested in digging more deeply into Angel Island stories per se, or the stories of individuals, is to go to the Immigration Station Foundation website, and they have a whole collection of oral histories that have been turned into stories, not just Chinese immigration, there's Russian Jewish immigration, people from Mexico. There are a lot of really fascinating stories there. And then the second essay option is to tie together or to reflect on two of those stories. The third option is if you are interested in archives, and you can see how thrilling archives can be. On our website, we have links to both in-person archives and digital archives. And the assignment is to start on the journey of looking up something, trying to find something out, and then describing that journey in a way that would be helpful for future students. So to say, well, I started out with this finding aid, and then I went to San Bruno to the National Records, National Archives, or you don't even have to go to San Bruno. You can do other research. I'm not asking you to do a research paper because this is just a one-unit class, but if you are interested in starting on that road to learning about how to use archives, that's another option, and that the details are described. And finally, for any of you who are participating in our Townsend Working Group and putting together the exhibition and performance for next semester, just doing a short write-up about that will also fulfill this final assignment. And if anybody wants to talk about this or anything else, my office hours are, as always, Wednesdays from 1:30 to 2:30 at 320 Bauer Worcester Hall. And I just want to mention on a couple of other assignments, just a reminder, those of you who are doing your explorations assignment at the Undoing Time exhibition, a reminder that it's required that you go to either the Wednesday or the Sunday guided tours with the underground scholars. to complete that assignment. And you only have a couple more weeks to do that, so don't leave that until the end. And I highly recommend that you do that before November 4th, because Julio Morales, the curator, will be speaking at that time, and you'll get a lot more out of that talk if you have already gone to the exhibition with the Underground Scholar Tour. For those of you who did the Angel Island field trip, I just realized that the date of the assignment, that it's open, it isn't letting you submit. So I will fix that. So those of you who did the Angel Island field trip, I'll send out an announcement, and then you can complete your assignment, and I'll give you time to do that on that assignment. And finally, for any of you who want to attend the oratorio on December 3rd, that's the final exploration option. And I encourage you, I mean, it's the end of the semester. Many of you will just be, I know, very busy, but it's a beautiful piece of music. And even if you don't do it as an assignment, it's something really worth going to. On any of these assignments, it's called a final reflection, but if you want to turn it in early, it's fine. I know that you have a very busy end of your semester. If you want to get this final assignment done early, you know, you've seen enough speakers that to compare 3, you could just base it on people who have already spoken if you would like. Do we have any questions about these assignments? Okay, so we are done for today, and if you want to chat with Li-Shin and James, they are out in the lobby, and I will see you next week.